Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynn Jenkins from ByteCubed. I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in today's workshop. This is the 8th in a series of workshops delivered in this webinar format. Today's workshop topic focuses on marketing, business development, and capture management essentials. Next slide. We're going to cover 3 critical areas small businesses must address that have a major impact on successful outcomes. 1, research and strategic planning. 2, marketing and business development, and 3, capture management. We're going to cover a lot of information today in what easily could be taught in a week-long session. So we're going to focus on critical planning, methods, and techniques your company needs to adopt. We've attempted to provide responses to questions we've received in advance of the workshop and have built in time to address questions you post today. We will also send an audio recording within 2 days of workshop completion, as well as a transcript in approximately 30 business days. Next slide. In terms of workshop format, audio, our participant microphones are muted for the duration of the webinar. Today's workshop is structured as follows: presentation, panel discussion, QA, summary, and wrap-up. At the end of this webinar, you'll be automatically redirected to a page where you will be asked to provide some feedback regarding today's workshop. It should take you less than 5 minutes to complete the survey. We'll also send you a survey in the mail that you used to register. That's email. For Q&A, if you have questions during the presentation, please click on the blue question mark located at the top of the page. Please limit today's questions to the scope of this workshop's topics. Our presenters received advanced questions, many of which will be addressed during their presentations. We find that many questions have been answered during earlier workshops or will be covered in future workshops. We encourage you to review transcripts, recordings, and slides found on our website. The web address is contained on the last slide of this presentation. Next slide. Our primary objective is to share methods, strategies, techniques, and tools designed to be used by small businesses, regardless of your size. It is our intent that you will understand the impact early planning from both a business and technology perspective has on your capacity to generate revenue via contract awards. Next slide. Our team of presenters and panelists will share our entrepreneurial, marketing, business development, capture management, and project management experiences and expertise gained from helping small business innovative research, or SBIR, and other non-research businesses market to both federal and commercial customers. Today's presenters are myself, Lynn Jenkins, Becca Henry, Phil Reeves, and Jason Talley. At this time, each presenter panelist will share their area of expertise relative to today's presentation and panel discussion. I'll go ahead and begin. I have 35+ years background and expertise in entrepreneurship, business development, strategic plan development, capture management, proposal development, curriculum development, and training working for companies like IBM, Lotus Development, Oracle, as well as small government contractors aligning customer needs with innovative solutions. During the past 2 years, I had the opportunity to develop training content, coach, mentor, and train DoD Velocitor SBIR companies with the goal of helping them increase their business and technology readiness and prepare for commercialization. Today, my objectives and our team's objective is to help share business development and capture management best practices that work for small companies. I'd like to introduce Becca Henry.
Hi, as Lynn said, my name is Becca Henry. I have a background in entrepreneurial management. I've worked with startups and mid-sized companies in the commercial market using lean startup methodologies to help improve processes, growth strategies, and value proposition. I'm very excited to be here, and I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you, Becca. Phil Reeves.
Hi, my name is Philip Reeves. I have a background in finance and government contracting. I've worked in business development and capture for a small business. I've won SBIRs, I've advised SBIR companies, and I've also run a state and local SBIR technology assistance program. So really excited for today's workshop.
Thank you, Phil. Jason Talley.
Hey, thanks, Lynn. My name is Jason Talley. I am the project manager of the DoD Training and Advocacy Program. Hope everyone has found the value in our workshops my team have put together over the past several months. Including my work on this program, I was also responsible for directing the training and development portion of the DoD Velocitor program that supported SBIR and STTR companies with Phase 1 and Phase 2 contracts. I've worked in the government contracting arena for the past 10+ years. I've supported both DoD and federal agencies from a programmatic, policy development, and training perspective. Most importantly, I've supported small businesses for the entirety of my career. This includes business development, marketing, and human capital management in an effort to help small businesses overcome the pain points of working with the government as well as commercial clients.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone. Let's get started with one of the most important activities all companies should invest time and resources to complete, research and planning. Next slide. As small businesses, all small businesses need to create a business plan that addresses your overall business and technology. This overarching plan will include a path to winning contracts that should lead to transition or commercialization for SBIR sitter companies. I might also add that the information that we're going to share today is applicable to all small businesses. Your research and planning are going to need to be both strategic and tactical. The premise is that you'll perform comprehensive due diligence in planning. Today, we're going to highlight the business opportunity pursuit that you will expect will yield positive results. Next slide. I'm going to call this the bubble slide that we're going to refer to a few times during today's presentation. This is a simple process slide of how you want to approach marketing, business development, capture management, and proposal development. What's important is that in any organization, regardless of who you're marketing to, whether it's the research and development arena, commercial, or government, you need to follow a process which includes planning that helps you identify your target market. Once you understand your market, you should have the ability to identify opportunities. You go after these opportunities, or we call that performing marketing or business development. We qualify those opportunities. We make sure that people have funding. We do something called capture management, which we'll discuss a lot later on in this presentation. But we want to make sure that everything that we gather positions us well to win this opportunity. Then we do something called a bid, no bid, and we will discuss bid, no bid later in detail during the presentation. But we get to a point where we decide whether we're going to pursue something or not pursue it. Ideally, we develop a proposal and we submit it, and hopefully we end up getting an award. So this is a visual of the process. I'm going to ask Phil to describe how you should approach strategic business planning. Next slide.
Thanks, Lynn. So we described the idea that you need to do strategic planning. I want to focus on what you need to plan. So in the past, we've seen people use really long, complex, formal business plans, but we found that those tend to take a lot of time, they sit on the shelf, and they're kind of stagnant. So instead, we want to recommend a simplified idea called the business model canvas. And this allows you to get critical functions on paper quickly and in a way where you can see how all of the parts connect. The graphic on this page highlights the main function, and I'll talk about a few. On the right is the revenue side of your business. Here you want to focus on customer relationships. What kind of relationships do you want to have with your customers? And how integrated do you want to be with them? For most of you, it's going to be a very long-term relationship, but other examples could be more transactional. Channels describes how you will get to your customer. Will it be through a prime? Where will you market to them? Where are your customers? You want to have a way to connect with them. One example could be attending or presenting at technical conferences where government personnel frequent as a way to get in touch. Customer segments describes the different customers you plan to pursue. A customer segment could be an agency, it could be a program, or a type of user. If you can identify different groups who will all use your technology in a slightly different way, then you found a different customer segment. And it's important to identify them because each segment needs to be marketed to differently. Revenue is how you will charge for your product or service. Is it a one-time fee? Does it require ongoing maintenance? Is there some sort of subscription service? It's important that the way you charge aligns with how your customer buys. On the left side of the graphic is key partners. These could be prime contractors that you will integrate with. Key activities include things like testing and evaluation or manufacturing. You want to think through these critical functions and so that they can have them in the plan before you go to market. Key resources requires thinking through any personnel you may need or funding. The goal is to make sure that you have what you need to execute the plan. Finally, is the cost structure. Especially for small businesses, it's critical that you know your cost structure, not only of your business, but also of your product. You want to ensure that you can deliver your product or service profitably. In the center of the graphic is the value proposition, which is truly one of the most important parts of the plan. The value prop describes why a customer buys from you and what problem you're solving. It really ties the entire model together, describing what you're communicating outwardly and driving how you're building your business. And so since the value proposition is such a critical element of your overarching business strategy, it deserves more attention. And so my colleague Becca is going to provide us insight on what it is and how it's created. Next slide, please.
So Phil talked about how important the value proposition is, but I want to tell you what it actually is. The value proposition is the promise of value to your potential customer. You are telling the customer, this is what I'm offering you, this is how it will benefit you, and this is why my solution is better than the other options. But who is your value proposition for? Your audience can be anyone. It should change based on who you're speaking to. You should have a value proposition for each of the different channels that Phil mentioned from the business model canvas. So whether it's partners, be it primes or research institutes, customers, government agencies, channels, distribution channels. If you're talking to an engineer, your value proposition should be technical and highlight innovation. How are you going to make this engineer's job easier? If you're talking to an end user, your value proposition should communicate how easy it is to use. So I've told you what the value proposition is and who your audience is, but there are key considerations to keep in mind before you actually sit down and develop your value proposition. Next slide. So in developing your value proposition, you should start with a customer archetype. An archetype, or a customer persona, is a character you've made up for the types of users you may have within your pool of desired customers. You get this by doing research. This is research on the market, on current offerings within the market, statistics on customer usage of products and technologies that are similar, competitive, and complementary to yours. This is the information used to find your initial target market, and your value proposition is crafted as a hypothesis of the person you think would find value in your product or technology within the initial target market you've chosen. Next, you should be talking to potential customers, understanding their problems and needs, and looking at their holistic experience. Now, just a side note here, keep in mind that within the federal space, not everyone has a problem. Your potential customer is more likely to be in need of an innovation. When you're talking to potential customers, you should be asking them questions to understand their challenges and subsequently how to solve them. What I've seen here a lot of times is when people talk to customers, they ask questions that validate the solution they're providing. Or they say, this is my solution, what do you think? This is not why or how we should be talking to customers. We talk to customers to understand their problems and needs from their perspective. This means you should be asking open-ended questions, not yes or no questions or leading questions, but open-ended questions that get at their experience, and you want to understand it holistically. So when I say holistically, I mean in every occasion when you're providing an offering to a customer, there is a beginning and an end to what they've gone through within their experience. There was a circumstance or a span of time where the customer saw that they were lacking something, there was a challenge to be addressed, or a need to be fulfilled. Next, you should be observing the customer in their environment. So in the federal context, you can't always observe the customer in their environment, but if you can, it's beneficial to be on site so you can understand how they operate so that you can integrate your solution into their systems best. In the commercial space, by observing the customer, you can pick up on nonverbal cues exhibited when you ask a certain question or make a certain statement. You can observe responses and behaviors even as your customer is answering questions or making comments. This will get at the positive and negative feelings they have towards their problem and your solution, which of course is very valuable information to have. And lastly, you should be open to change. When you go in to talk to your customer, you're going in with only an idea or a hypothesis of who they are and what they need. These are preconceived notions that may be disproven. None of what you have already is entirely fact. But as you talk to the customers, they are the ones who are really telling you what the value is or should be for your solution or technology. You have your key considerations in mind, but what should your value proposition actually include? How do you create it? You need to gather some information before you start putting pen to paper. Next slide. So how do you create your value proposition? This is where you can talk about your technology. So first, you want to define your product, technology, or service offering. What does it do? The biggest mistake a lot of people make here is they describe how the offering works technically. This is not the place for that. Remember, communicating value is key, but before you present the value, they need to know what it actually does. So if you're presenting your value and what it does, for example, you could say, we have a sensor that detects approaching subjects and objects in inclement weather, such as sandstorms and windstorms. Next, in identifying the service offering benefits, you want to talk about the benefits of your product or technology's features and functions. This is where you can talk more about how it works, but remember, you should be catering this to your audience. So if you're talking to someone who's not technical, you don't want to get too technical here. So your value proposition will continue as, not only can our sensor detect approaching subjects and objects in inclement weather, but it is small, undetectable, and can be deployed without taking the weapon systems out of commission and moving them to maintenance facilities. And lastly, you want to articulate the value to the customer. What makes your offering unique and different? So your value proposition would be as follows. With the ability to detect approaching subjects and objects in inclement weather, our small and undetectable sensor can be deployed real-time without moving weapon systems out of commission and into maintenance facilities. Our system allows for real-time tech updates, so it saves time and money. So I mentioned previously that your value proposition should be crafted with different messaging based on who you're talking to. So how do you communicate those messages to a diverse audience that may have both technical and business people? Next slide.
Great, thanks, Becca. So I'll use an example for this one. We worked with a company that created a technology that could annotate videos. And so instead of watching a 10-hour drone video, they could highlight the relevant and key 20 minutes. So for a technical user concerned about security, the value prop might involve the idea that a smaller packet of data is less prone to intercepts. For an analyst who has to watch the video, the value prop is clearly the time saved as a result of the annotation. For a staffer who needs to compile different sources into an intelligence product, the value is being able to easily integrate this file into a larger report. And then finally, for the intelligence customer, it's getting the intelligence in a format that allows for quick decision making. Again, regardless of who you're talking to, notice that we don't talk about how the technology works, but rather the value the customer received. And so now I'd like to shift our focus to another critical yet related topic, and that's technology planning. Next slide, please. So we've talked about the importance of business planning, but I want to take some time to go through technology planning. We've found working with a lot of SBIR companies that technology planning is an area where some people fall short. The key idea of technology planning is that you want to think through and plan the entire technical roadmap of your technology from concept through fielding or commercialization. That means identifying what milestones you need to meet in order to reach TRL levels, what tests you need to conduct to ensure that the technology meets criteria. If your technology is going into a program, you want to plan for that in advance so you can align with that program's funding cycles. The same thing applies if your technology must be integrated through a prime. You'll need to know their processes and timelines to make sure you're a fit. What you've probably realized through this process is that technology planning is something that can't be done in a vacuum. We find that a lot of businesses are very strong with creating and mapping a technical plan, but good technology planning means talking directly to stakeholders. You need to speak with program managers, your TPOC, acquisition personnel, prime contractors, and end users, anyone who's a stakeholder. And the goal of all these dialogues is to gather the input you need to ensure you know where your technology is going. You don't want to plan as you go along. Even during your phase one, you want to know what program you're targeting, how you will integrate, any testing requirements, and etc. That way you can ensure your business has the funding, the personnel, and the time needed to make your technology successful. So what should be clear is that technology and business planning, again, aren't necessarily separate activities. You have to work technical and business plans in tandem. And so again, your plan requires research and interaction with respective customers. Next slide. So you have to speak with customers in order to create strong plans. For the government, you may not be able to speak directly to personnel, but there are a ton of ways for you to get insight into what an agency is planning. Ultimately, our goal with all this customer interaction throughout business technology planning is to find a buying customer. I should also mention that this customer engagement is something that does not stop. You want to constantly interact with customers to update plans and check alignment. We do this through staying on top of research about target agencies and programs, and also through discussions we have with customers or presentations we give them or they give us. And so it also means continuously tracking program funding and budget. Finally, it's a must that you understand your customers' requirements and specifications. All of these things constantly change, so it's your job to remain agile and adjust. Now, before you can initiate prospective customer interactions, you need to create marketing materials that concisely and succinctly reflect your technology's solution or offering. Next slide, please. So this slide goes through some of the tools that we use to communicate marketing And so some of them are more technical in nature, but the key is that you need to create collateral that speaks to your customers and have it handy when you're presenting. Also, you want to make sure that your collateral highlights your value propositions. So let's talk about one of the must-have marketing tools in government contracting, the one-page capability statement. Next slide, please. So I like to say that in government contracting, a capability statement is like a business card. You just have to have it. And so a good one-pager is going to contain a lot of overview information, but then there are some areas that I think companies can do a really good job of highlighting their value propositions on. And so, for instance, always describe your product and technology in a way that your customers understand. Use their words, use their vocabulary. Differentiate yourself with your areas of expertise. Highlight your contracting vehicles so customers know how to get to you. A lot of people will put icons of current customers and talk about past performance, but again, if you do that, it's not enough to say what the project was or who the customer was. You want to say what was the value you delivered for that customer? What was the results they realized? And then again, it goes without saying, but you'd be surprised how many people forget it. You need to have your relevant contact information on the slides. And so the other must-have technical document used to describe innovations and innovations is a quad chart. And I'm going to have Lynn walk us through that. Next slide, please.
The quad chart is an acceptable document, especially in the DoD community. It may not be as known in the commercial environment, but a quad chart, as it suggests, has 4 quadrants. Many agencies have their own outline for the way that they want their quad chart to look, but primarily what I'd like to talk about is the information that should be contained in a quad chart. So of course, the name of your actual technology, sometimes people don't include that. So the technical name, typically you have the technical concept. So the concept that tells your user what your technology is going to do. You want to make sure that you include the name of the technology, if it's being developed for a specific agency or department. It's good to include the SBIR topic your technology addresses if you're in that community, in the research and development community. Underneath the technology, the first area, which includes the technical concept, you want to talk about the objective of your technology. What problems does it solve? And I didn't mention earlier, but I should have, the quad chart normally stands alone, so you may not have the opportunity to explain that quad chart to someone in person, so it needs to be a standalone with a great technology concept. You also want to show what your approach is. So what's the product functionality? So as Becca talked about value proposition, Phil was talking about how you describe your technology. You need to have a succinct description of what your technology does, and also to include features, functions, and benefits. So again, as Becca so well clarified, we talked about value proposition. What does your technology do and who does it benefit? Inside of that technology concept or approach, you also want to have quantitative metrics. So if you say something is small, you need to have some type of a determination. How much smaller is it from another type of technology? If the weight, if it's much lighter, you want to include that. And also you want to have different kind of metrics, both qualitative and quantitative. Some people have heard of SWAP, so size, weight, and performance. How much faster is it? 2 times, 4 times, 100 times faster. Typically, the first thing you'll see in a quad chart is a graphic. So a graphical depiction of your technology. This graphic should show your technology in scale. So in Becca's example of a sensor, if that sensor was so small, you'd want to show the size of that sensor relative to that weapon system or aircraft. The graphic should also be able to be well understood. However, if your technology is very complex, that someone may not understand it without some type of discussion, underneath the technology, the graphic of your technology is the actual description. So the description would show more of the concept about, what it addresses and also clarifies what you may have shown in your graphic. You also want to include schedule and cost. Typically a schedule, which is critical for companies that are trying to commercialize their technology, would show dates, months. It would also show your technology progression by phase. So if you were in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3, your potential customer is going to want to know when you plan to commercialize that technology, and also the period of performance. Is it going to take 12 months? Are they expecting it in 8 months or 6 months? So they want to see the actual, that timeline. And also we'd like to show, we'd want to show the commercialization goals. So when you expect to commercialize this outside of its actual research and development use. In terms of cost, many companies have questions about how you actually reflect that cost as you're maybe potentially at phase 1. So it's typically a rough order of magnitude by phase that shows that you've done the research to look at your market, the technology, potential funding. So again, how are you going to fund that? And we'll talk a lot more about that later when we get into bid, no bid. So far we've talked about what key areas and considerations that need to be researched during high-level strategic business and technology planning. We talked about the importance of the value proposition, not created by your company in a vacuum, but validated by prospective customers. We also covered essential marketing materials used to market your capabilities to the federal government. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about the process of doing opportunity identification. So up until this point, we've talked a lot about what you need to have as it relates to planning, tools, people. We talked a lot about relationship, but now we have to have something to talk to them about, and that's where we get into opportunity identification. Next slide. I want to refer back to the bubble slide, and you'll see this a couple of more times, so it is by intent that we are showing this to you. When we talk about business development, when you look at this bubble slide, business development typically occurs throughout this whole process, but especially through opportunity ID, pursuit, and qualification. So when I'm talking about business development, those are all of the activities that you're going to perform to try to qualify this opportunity so you can add it to your pipeline and your company can potentially win an award. Next slide. Now that you have a visual of the actual process, I'd like to help you understand better how you're going to actually perform agency due diligence. So what you need to do is to identify the opportunity. Yes, we told you that. We need to tell you how you do that. So today, intent is to be very instructional and specifically to help you build a pipeline of opportunities so that in case one opportunity does not come to fruition, you have other opportunities. We know that our audience addresses many of the SBIR communities who may only have one SBIR, but there are also companies that have several SBIRs that they are working on. So it's important to make sure that you match your corporate capabilities to forecasted opportunities. What do we mean by that? In the government and in commercial as well, they plan to spend money on certain activities, certain projects, certain mission critical projects. So we need to make sure that you understand that you can align your technology with that potential the potential opportunity to your technologies that result in an award. Next slide. We want to talk about how your company actually performs this research. So how do we've talked a lot to this point that we need to understand what the customer wants, but how do you do that? So how do we find out what the agency is looking for? What are their mission, goals, and objectives? How do we understand how they're going to get to you? So we talk about acquisition vehicles. In the federal government specifically, they need to have a way to procure from you. And those are typically called contracting vehicles. So we need to understand before you approach an agency what or how they're going to buy from you. We also need to understand if that agency uses a contracting agency. So for example, in Army and a couple of the other DoD components, they have certain arms that are the agencies that are providing their contracting support. So you need to understand before you start to look at an opportunity, who's doing that procurement. So what are they looking for? How are they going to get to you? And how are they going to procure? Through what contracting agency? And also, it's important to do the due diligence on any kind of historical products and services. So there's no need to sell a sensor to an agency that doesn't procure sensors or whatever your technology is. You want to make sure that historically they do purchase what you want. Otherwise, there's no need to pursue that agency. And I think we mentioned NAICS codes already, but the classification code, so NAICS or NAICS code, we want to make sure that if your technology is categorized under a specific NAICS code, which says what your technology does, that agency can actually get to you using that NAICS code on a particular contract. And also in R&D topics, many times if you're trying to do business with a federal agency in the research arena, they do post their research and development We've had many previous workshops that talked about the BAA, Broad Agency Announcement, procurement or process, solicitation process. So agencies do post what they're looking for. So that's also an excellent way for you to do your due diligence. Next slide. Now we're going to have Phil talk about how you actually perform that research.
Thanks, Lynn. So I love doing research on agencies, and I've talked about it before. So I want to go through some of the specific sources that you can go through to find information about agencies and programs. So first is OMB 300's USAspending.gov. This is where you can find information about high-level program spending at an agency. And it's a great resource. This website's been updated. I highly recommend it. FPDS.gov. This gives us federal procurement spending information from a historical perspective. And why that's important is because, as Lynn described, we want to know what contracting vehicles is an agency using, where are they spending their money, what products and services, and that type of information we can pull from FPDS. The Defense Technical Information Center is a great resource, and we're going to talk more about that, so I'll leave that one. FedSpending.org is another resource for historical information, and here we can get, again, high-level agency spending, which gives us a sense of where an agency is going. And then finally, the SBA Small Business Scorecard. What this allows us insight to is to how an agency meets their small business goals. All agencies are required to do a certain percentage with small businesses, hub zone businesses, 8A, woman-owned, veteran-owned, etc. And by tracking the small business scorecard, we can see how an agency is performing. And that gives us insight into if this is a favorable agency for small businesses, or if they may be low on their numbers, is there an opportunity for us to offer our services? Next slide, please. So this slide goes through where I think we can find a lot of information around specific agencies and programs and initiatives, and that's really where the opportunity lies for building a business. So first you want to start off with, and we'll focus on the DoD in this case. So first you want to start off with the National Defense Strategy. The National Defense Strategy lays out for the entire federal government the goals of the Defense Department from the White House. This gives us insight into where the executive level is thinking about defense, and so we're trying to align what we do with this strategy. Again, all agencies are going to roll into the strategy, so it's critical that you know it. Agency websites. On agency websites, you can find a plethora of information. Of course, you have to know the mission, but you can also find the strategic plan, so we can see where an agency is going. We can align our services to it. We can understand what new initiatives they have, what contracts may be coming, things like that. Hearings are a very unique thing for the government. It's one of my favorite sources. I think a lot of people don't utilize it. Hearings are where agency personnel will go in front of Congress to discuss a program or an issue or an agency, or maybe a nomination hearing for a senior person in the government. Again, if you watch these hearings, you can hear from the government in their own voices about programs, about agencies, or if you watch, for instance, a nomination hearing, you can see that the new director or the head of R&D, where they want to take their portion of the department. Press releases, another good example. Budgets. Budgets are beyond critical. We have to know where money is going in the federal government. So by tracking the budget, we can see where their priorities lie and we can align ourselves to them. Prior SBIR topics, Lynn touched on this. The SBIR, especially in the DoD, SBIRs are designed to solve problems, drive innovation for the Department of Defense. And so if we can look at prior topics, we can still learn about problems or initiatives that may still be out there that we can still leverage for our own benefit. FBO.gov, again, this is a website where the government puts out all of their procurements over a certain size standard across the government. Small businesses need to be checking this website weekly, if not daily, to see opportunities that may be relevant for them. Sources sought on RFIs, you find these on FBO.gov. If you think about the procurement process, a sources sought on RFI highlights a procurement that's coming. So we want to get in front of that so we can position accordingly. And so next slide, please. So I want to take a second to talk about DTIG, and I want to take a step back. I know we've been covering a lot. So what you have on the screen in front of you is a pull from the Defense Technical Information Center. And really what this is a pull from the R&D budget of one of the defense agencies. Why is this so important? Because a lot of times when we're trying to find additional funding for our SBIR topic, we're going to get that funding from within the R&D sort of world. And so again, we want to know how R&D money is going to be spent. And so we have on the bottom of the screen a link to the full page, but here I want to highlight a couple of things at the top. So in this one, we can see that on the left here, the budget activity is from the R&D program office, and then we can see the program element, which tells us this from the test and evaluation and science technology. So again, we know where we're targeting specifically. We know the name of the program we're targeting. On the left, we can see specific elements in that program. And again, that's what we're really targeting as we kind of go after. So what we're looking for on this slide is, if you see 17, 18, 19, and it projects all the way to 22, what we're looking to see is, does the funding rise or fall for one of our target areas? And so, for instance, directed energy testing, we can see that it's climbing from, let's see, what is this, $7 million in 17 and climbing to $9 million in 22. So we know that's an initiative that's seen, that has some progress, that has some legs. If we look, for instance, at C4I, that initiative is actually falling a little bit through 22. So it may give us some pause as we think about it. So what we're looking for here, again, these macro level things. But if you click into the link and dig more into these, you'll see a lot of detail about these program elements. And again, it's a very target-rich environment for business development. And so now that we've performed research, I'd like to turn it back to Lynn to review everything we've kind of been through thus far. Next slide, please.
So we understand clearly that you need to have a strategic and tactical plan based on preferably mission-critical needs. So we just showed you in the example that Phil reviewed where you find that information, and also there's a plethora of information. We've included a link for all of those sites at the end of this presentation. So that's the way you start developing your pipeline, is looking at opportunities that are preferably funded, unless you're looking at organic opportunities that you hope to initiate yourself. You also need to understand your potential customers. So what's the importance of that technology, product, or solution? How does it address their issues? Does it introduce an innovative way to address their challenges or improve their mission? That's the value proposition. Also, in terms of looking at the funded opportunities, you can't do this in a vacuum. You're going to need to be talking to some key stakeholders and ensure that they validate the importance of your technology or your solution. Ideally, an agency or program will have a need for your requirement, will have a requirement for what you have, and you'll have performed the due diligence with the ultimate goal of having your specifications written into a requirement. Next slide. So let's talk more about the relationship. So this is we know what we want to say to a particular person, but what's most important is those agency contacts, those prime contractor contacts. It's a tongue twister. So in the agency side, you have small business directors or contracting specialists. Many companies ask us, how do we find out who the appropriate program manager is? Agency small business directors or contracting specialists are the right person to go to that can help you navigate. But in order to do that, you need to know what to say to them and how to help them advocate for your technology. You also have program managers. A program manager, of course, that owns that potential program where you want to insert your technology, commercialize your technology. So they are the owners and they care about that performance. Contracting officers, they care about the actual acquisition or the contract. So they're the people that are warranted to sign that contract. Those are some of the very important people because that's how you get paid. And then you have contract specialists that support the contracting officer, and they typically look at your technical work as well as the contractual work. Then, of course, you have the important people, the project staff or end users. For many of our SBIR companies, they find that working with engineers and understanding how they can improve their work is a great place to start, but there's no necessarily need to start only at one level. You can work across different types of agency contacts. And also the technical point of contact, that's the TPOC. You'll hear us mention that in your acronym list. So the TPOC also for SBIR, STTR companies is critical. They're also your liaison and help you navigate. On the other side, you've got prime contractors. So prime contractor that potentially has the contract for a very large program that you must integrate with for a program of record. You'll hear us talk about that. And again, we refer you back to our website with previous presentations, the POR, you can see that. Those are very large programs, and typically you will need to work with a prime contractor to get your technology inserted or integrated. Not necessarily always, but most occasions. So there are SBIR liaisons at the prime contractor companies. If you cannot find that person, it's wonderful to do some Googling, look at presentations that are made, go to different conferences. You'll find that person. If that organization has a major SBIR related contract award, that's the person you'll need to look for. Many large prime contractors also have small businesses directors. So again, those small business directors are able to navigate you and show you or point you to their capture managers. So we'll talk a lot about capture later, but that actually is a title in many of the large organizations. It's a function and a title, but they're people that are, they're accountable for ensuring that their technology and their programs are successful. Then, of course, there's a program manager that has overall oversight of that whole program. So, capturing it as well as performing on that program. So let's talk a little bit more about what's important to each of these people. Next slide. So small business director, when you're speaking with them, and again, piggybacking off what Becca talked about earlier, you have to make sure you have the right message for the right person. So the small business director, they're measured on small business metrics. So you don't necessarily want to talk to them about a very technical solution, not that they don't understand that, but approach them with what's important to them. So the value of your business, why they should work with you, and give them that high level value of what your technology does. A program manager, they're looking for low risk. So they are primarily concerned about project delivery performed by qualified companies. So they are going to want to understand your past performance, where you've done this before, if you're experienced. Contracting officer, they also want to look to work with qualified, low-risk vendors. So we see that word a lot, low risk. Nobody wants to look at high-risk companies or solutions. So we want to make sure that the contracting officer understands that vendors that are easy to do business with, they are also interested in negotiating, supporting, and managing an effective contract. So we'll talk a little bit more later during bid, no bid about contracting, but it's important that you understand how to work with the contracting officer. As I mentioned earlier, the contracting specialist, they support the contracting officer, so it's also a good person to have a relationship with. And at different events, you may see a contracting officer technical representative or a contracting officer, good person to know. The program staff or end users, they want to make sure that you make their job or function easier. So is it going to take me less time to do something? Is it easier to do? That's what they care about. So as we mentioned earlier, that's why it's important many times to start with an engineering or engineer to make sure that your technology is indeed providing the results that you think it should. And also, it will validate the value proposition. So many times from a technical perspective, end users, the stakeholders are key personnel to talk to. And then also, of course, your TPOC, remember the technical point of contact, they're looking for novel solutions. So what's new, what's innovative, but more importantly, does what you have reduce their administrative burden? Next slide. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into the large company. So as we mentioned earlier, many of the programs of record and other opportunities do necessitate that you work with a large prime contractor. So what's important to them? And I would urge you to go back to our Working with Primes workshop, where we had the opportunity to have a panel of large prime contractors, and they talked extensively about what's important to them. But I'm just going to cover it quickly, so if you have not had a chance to look at that presentation, you will all be on the same page. So when you talk to a large business, you want to have a complementary service, not necessarily competitive. So I think in terms of an approach, how do you augment, enhance what they're doing? They typically are looking for a company that has a niche offering. So if you've got 25 competitors, maybe you're not as attractive to them. They also, of course, want to know about your value proposition. So not only technically, but as a low-risk vendor, what's the value for them to do business with you? Do you have past performance? Why should they team with you? So do you have the experience? And again, just the distinction, past performance is typically a past contract. Experience could be people that are on your team. They also and I keep saying they also, but what's important to them, probably all of these items are important, but do you know the customer? Do you know the client? Do you know the technical solution? So if you can add that value, that's typically a great way for you to approach that large prime contractor, not necessarily with your hand out looking to join their team, but tell them how you can enhance their team. And also, if you're able to participate in the proposal development process, meaning can you do some technical writing? Can you do some capture? Are you an added value team member? That also is very important to prime contractors, that also may have limited opportunities and maybe have competing opportunities that they're pursuing. It is also important that you, if you are one of the set-asides in the small business arena, so if you're a veteran-owned small business, hub zone, just a woman-owned small business, it's important for them to know if you potentially have contracting vehicles they can use to leverage getting their actual technology or solution in front of that contracting officer. So these are, in terms of relationship building, you want to build a relationship with large and small business teaming partners. It's not only large, there are many smalls that do have those contracting vehicles, but the key is that for small businesses that don't have a lot of resources, it's a way for you to expand your team. And I know that in my past career, I've always looked for expanding my success pool by working with large private companies that have those vendor relationships. Next slide. So in terms of the relationship building, I think one of the most important things to remember is you want to become a partner, not a pest. So while you're making phone calls to people, sending emails, you always want to have a reason and intent for getting in touch with them. You want to nurture them. We know that customer acquisition costs are high. So, we spend a lot of money going after these different solicitations, trying to win. We deploy resources. We spend an inordinate amount of money doing proposal development. So you want to make sure that these customers are nurtured. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later as we talk about program development. But you have to understand your customer, again, using your prime contractor or your own knowledge, and create a continued reason for that discussion. So schedule updates. So some of you had questions about how do you get in front of someone? How do you gain their interest? You have to have a reason. Even if it's at a conference and you Google someone that's going to be there, someone in a certain position, and you find something that creates a good conversation point, that person will remember you when you follow up with an email. Next slide. So back to the bubble slide. Now we've talked about planning. We've talked about your target market, so the planning that Phil talked about, looking at different DTIC, looking at different agency mission and goals and objectives. We talked about looking for an opportunities. We showed you some of the tools to actually identify those opportunities. That DTIC, so the example with the program elements specific to either research or acquisition. So we're looking for that opportunity. So now we have to go pursue that. So we talk about pursuit. That's the relationship building. So you have tools, you have quad charts, you have capability statements, you have longer presentations. So pursuit means I'm going to actually go out of the building, I'm going to go out and make face-to-face, hopefully, or on the telephone, have meetings with people. And the reason we're having these meetings and continuing this work is that we have to qualify that opportunity. So not everything that looks like a great opportunity is a great opportunity for your company. And we will spend a lot of time talking about bid, no bid. But the key is that you need to know how to qualify that opportunity. And to qualify the opportunity, there's a certain set of things that you'll need to do. We call them doing the due diligence to qualify them as high probability if you want to win and don't waste time. Next slide, please. So let's talk about capture management. So we talked about business development. Those are activities that you do, going to meetings, scheduling meetings with companies to talk about their issues or maybe new innovative ways to do things. And in capture management, our objective today, because we technically could spend at least a week or a couple of weeks talking about capture management, but our goal is to help you understand how to increase your win probability for these opportunities and understand the expected outcomes of doing effective due diligence. Next slide. So in capture management, let's think of capture in this respect. Business development is typically the people that are doing the hunting. So they're looking for opportunities. In capture, you're taking a lot of that information and you're going to help them qualify that, further qualify it to the point that you can get that to either doing a proposal submission or going after a contract. So with some of the important things you need to understand, call them critical success factors, you have to have a realistic opportunity pipeline. So using the example that Phil showed us on that DTIC, when you have a chance to further investigate all those pages, you can quickly align your technology with this potential solution that's already, or the actual program that's already funded. So you want to have realistic opportunity if you're able to develop your technology, go from concept to product in time to fit into that actual program, that could become a potential realistic opportunity. If you cannot and you can't align everything, maybe that's not a good opportunity. We also recommend as you build your pipeline, and these are also some best practices, make sure that you have short-term and long-term opportunities. You have to keep the money coming into your organization. So you want to look for opportunities that are potentially, maybe they're 12 months, maybe it's 6 months. Some companies asked us in their questions some of the streamlined acquisitions. So is there something where I'm able to go out and find an opportunity where it doesn't take maybe longer than a few months to win, or maybe it's something called a sole source. So you want to make sure that your portfolio in your pipeline is both short and longer term, so that you, again, keep the revenues flowing. As you're looking at capture, you want to make sure that you've got the strategic prime and subcontract companies. So as you're building your plan, technical and business planning, start aligning those companies that you think you want to do business with. And as you actually perform some of the research under the FPDS that Phil was talking about, or some of the other program information, you'll find those companies. Many companies also announce their awards, or you'll find that even on the SBIR topic, some of the awardees. So you can find those companies that you want to potentially team with. And of course, building relationships, making sure that your capabilities are aligned with their requirements, that you have the expertise and experience. If you don't have it internally, go team. Go find a company that has it. And most importantly, make sure that you have a win strategy. So in capture, and again, we're going to spend a good amount of time talking about capture in the next few minutes. But in capture management, you have to have a strategy about why you think you're going to win this. And it just can't simply be because you want to, but you have to have a win strategy, which is developed from business development all the way through to the point where you are creating a proposal that you plan to submit. Next slide. So in business development and capture management, Jason's going to talk to us a little bit more about the intersection of all of these different processes.
All right, thanks, Lynn. This graphic depicts the interrelationship in the business development process. The intent of this slide is to highlight the importance of the continuity of information, meaning from business development, when you're hunting and you're looking for an opportunity, all the way to operations management, when you're actually delivering your final product. You must ensure there's an open dialogue in the entirety of this process. It is key that you do not overpromise and underdeliver to your client. Next, we'll look at business development. And in this process, you're acquiring new business. You're likely asking these three questions. Does this customer have the money? Does this customer have the problem that we can solve? And also, does this customer know what our company can do to solve their problem? And then there's capture management, which Lynn has talked about and highlighted. It means creating strategies that increase the win probability of the work that you've done through your business development activities. This includes leveraging past relationships, understanding the customer's hot buttons. In a perfect world, you're actually helping shape the requirement of your client. And there's proposal development. Now you need a line of everything that you know about the customer's needs, along with what your customer does well, and see how all those things match up. You need to ensure that you're highlighting your customer's your company's technical capabilities. Everything that you've told your potential client you can do, you need to ensure that you detail that in your proposal. And this also means backing it up with past performance when possible. Equally as important, you must ensure that your proposal is compliant with all the requirements spelled out by the customer. Then there's also operations management. There must be a perfect collaboration and communication with the operations team who is responsible for effectively delivering the project upon award. Next slide, please. All right, now as we continue our capture management considerations, it is key to remember capture management is opportunity specific, and it's important to know who has responsibilities for these critical roles in this process. Resources for capture management, or these next three items, can be either dedicated function or ad hoc within your organization, meaning that either one person does all these roles, or there's somebody that's responsible for each one of these roles, or maybe you're even outsourcing each of these roles within your organization. So there's business development. In most of my career, it's always been ingrained in me that everyone does business development. This is very true for small organizations. You're looking for new opportunities, and you can communicate your company's value proposition to potential clients. In program development, you're already within an organization, and you're looking for ways to organically add value to your existing line of work, or you're looking for ways for your current work that you can bolster and add value to other departments. So while you're in the building, you can talk to other clients saying, we're doing this work right now for our current customer. Is this something that you need? Or understand another need that that client may have within, or that customer may have within the building. This also could mean introducing your customers to new product or services that your company is already offering. So you may already be building a platform solution for your customer, and you actually have something else that has a synergy that adds value to that offering that you're giving to your customer currently. But there's also proposal development. This is a very critical aspect of putting your technical capabilities to paper. Quite often, small organizations can either have a dedicated technical writer on staff, or they can outsource this work. In instances where there are teaming partners, each company may be responsible for completing certain sections of a proposal. Once again, the key point of this is capture management focuses on a key or a specific opportunity. So as those opportunities change, these roles may change within your teaming agreements or also within your organization. Next slide, please.
Now we're going to talk about the bid, no bid. So you hear bid, no bid, and basically what that is, organizations typically have a structured process to determine whether or not they're going to move forward. The bid, no bid can happen very early in business development. It can happen during the capture management, in the beginning, middle, or end of capture management. So the bid, no bid is basically a set of criteria that you decide what's going to encourage you to move forward with a potential opportunity. So we call that bid, no bid, and there actually is a process. What we'd like to share with you today are some of the key considerations for making a bid, no bid, although this list is not extensive or exclusive, but these are some of the key considerations we feel you should consider as a small business. So we'll go through this pretty quickly. There are several slides, so there are a lot of considerations, but we want you to think about in your organization, how would you actually approach each of these different considerations? So the first thing is, and I'm going to go from left to right, do you know that key decision makers are influencers? So are you talking to the right people? And all of this information should be captured meaning documented from the business development process all the way through proposal, to the time that you submit your proposal. So you need to make sure that at those conferences, we had a question, one of the attendees today asked us if we could provide a list of suitable conferences. A lot of these actual conferences are posted, and they usually post the key speakers, keynote speakers. You'd be wise to line up in line after they speak and introduce yourself and have something that's valuable to say to these decision makers. The other thing is you've got to ensure that the opportunity is aligned with their business strategy. So we talked about how you research and look for that strategy, then you want to validate that. So when Becca mentioned earlier about your value proposition, validate that what you're trying to actually sell to them or give them to use it aligns with what they're looking for, and it also aligns with your internal strategy. Of course, we talked about funding. So if funding of course is critical. So that's typically what most CEOs want to know. Is there actual dollars? Is it funded? And do we know that we're moving forward? Especially outside of potentially any of the forecasted opportunities, you need to make sure that there's dollars. So budget is always something critical that you might start with. When are you actually going to get paid? Or when is it going to be awarded? So if you're going after something that's not awarded for another 6 months, you need to think about that. The other thing you want to make sure is that you understand clearly the business need and pain driving the bid. So are the requirements already clear? Is there an opportunity for you to somehow include your information, your technology into the requirements? And are they feasible? So is it something that you think you can do? And again, always putting on your CEO hat or someone that's controlling your working capital. Are you investing wisely in these opportunities? And also, do you know who the evaluation criteria? Do you know what it is and how it's going to be weighted? So, and I would refer you back to one of our earlier evaluation process workshops. We talked a lot about evaluation criteria in the BAA world, but you need to know if it's technical, is it best value, is it price, how are they measuring this? Maybe it's for innovation. Next slide.
Okay, so let's explore some evaluation criteria companies need to keep in mind during the bid, no bid process. Pricing is one of the most important considerations, and you can see that's down in the right corner there with the dollar sign. Though important for phase 1 and phase 2 bids, this is a consideration definitely when you're building outside government work, other government work or commercial clients. Can your company afford to bid low on work and submit a pricing structure that is considered low price / technically acceptable? So are you willing to go low? Can you go low? And what are the ramifications of doing that? Secondly, is this work realistic? If you're looking at an RFP and the capabilities are very specific or the timeline for delivery is very short for the solution, there's a chance this work could be greatly influenced by the incumbent or by somebody else that's offering a solution to the government. So before you ramp up and submit that proposal or start doing your teaming agreements, be sure that this is realistic work that you can actually bid on. Next, do as much legwork as possible to understand the issues of the client. Why is this work being bid? Is this new work, or was the incumbent not able to deliver in a prior project? Was the incumbent not able to deliver due to technical or financial constraints, or were there other factors that led to this? The importance of due diligence cannot be understated. These next two factors go hand in hand. Do you truly understand the requirements? Do you have the resources, and are the terms and agreements amenable to you to deliver a final product for your customer? Can you deliver if you do not deliver? Can you deliver, and if you do not deliver according to the service level agreements, what are those consequences? For example, if one of the terms of the contract is that you must deliver a closeout report at the end of the project and you miss that deadline, what are those consequences for you and your company? Next, what does the client want? In the SBIR world, is this technology or solution being developed as a proof of concept, or can it be commercialized and scalable? For software solutions, are you developing a platform from the ground up, or are you able to utilize customizable off-the-shelf solutions? Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, we are going to go from left to right. In our previous example, we mentioned working a solution that may only be a proof of concept. Though it may not make it past the prototype stage for the government, are there other practical uses for the technology? Is this emerging or new technology? Does this ultimately fit into your overall strategic goals? Does an investment in this technology now show a return investment later down the road? So you have to make that decision early on. Also, if you have multiple principal investigators or multiple projects, is your project visible to leadership? Does leadership and stakeholders support your effort? Are they giving you the resources and the funding and the people you need to be successful? For SBIR and STTR work, do you have a principal investigator or do you have a teaming partner on staff? This is very important before you can actually get the contract started. So making sure you have that key personnel on staff. From a technical aspect, do you have developers or engineers? Do you have that technical staff on place? Do you have that knowledge, skills, and abilities? Do you have a project lead to ensure that you are operating on time and on budget? Next, beyond the human capital aspects of resources, are you able to scale and deliver? If you are asked to deliver 5,000 widgets, but you only budgeted or you only have funding for 200 widgets, are you able to scale? Are you able to find outside resources? Can you ramp up, or can you outsource this work? Ultimately, if you win this work, can you manage the risk that comes along with it? Have you mapped out contingencies for manufacturing, financial, technical, and human capital risk? You must look at all these. These are all equally important, and they can impact your company's ability to deliver. It is important that you answer yes or no to these questions or these considerations before you decide to actually bid on this work. Okay, next slide, please.
So you want to also make sure that people know who you are. So do you have a reputation? So going from left to right, how well known are you? So whether it's through your prime contractor, they know you directly, you have to make sure that you have a way to advertise. When I say advertise, I don't mean just through print advertising, but that you can articulate what you do and the value. As we mentioned, for the track record or with other opportunities, people want to know that you've either done this work before. If you're in the research world, they'll want to know that you have the testing setup, could be the testing evaluation. That's one of our upcoming workshops. But they want to make sure that you have a track record of some sort. So it could be people, it could be experiences. As Jason mentioned, it could be your principal investigator that has that experience. Do you have a relationship, and is it favorable? So we know that people buy from people they like, so that's pretty common. So you want to make sure that you are nurturing and not being a pest, but do you have a good relationship? So do you have a working relationship? Do you know that you're moving your actual solution along in the progression to get toward potential contract award? And the other thing is you want to make sure that outside of maybe the SBIR, STTR, R&D types of opportunities, do you need to have a partner? So you don't want to partner just to partner, but look at your partners and ensure that they add value. So are they going to complicate it or enhance your solution? Sometimes people just partner because they think the name is good, but maybe that's not enough. Next slide. Okay, as we look at this chart, we're going to go from left to right once again, and we're going to
Also, ask some more considerations, things that you should be considering when you're doing your no-bid analysis. And the first one here is basically what makes us different? What can we do better? What are we offering? What gives us a competitive advantage? Is it size? Is it weight? And is it performance? Or is it all those things? Is it our people? Is it our knowledge of the agency? You really need to study and understand what makes you different from your competitors. Do you know and understand the cost of doing business? Have you developed a rough order of magnitude? We're considering phase 1, proof of concept, to phase 3, commercialization. Have you considered the full investment of the solution? Have you considered if you have to do, or if you have to bring in external equity, are you willing to give up part of your company? So you have to look at that through the whole process from phase 1 to phase 2. What does that cost you? Simply put, have you taken all the right steps to ensure your solution is protected when you're looking at intellectual property? I encourage you to listen to our workshop on intellectual property and data rights. You can find that on our website. And lastly, have you thought about the consequences of not bidding or not doing the work? What is your lost opportunity cost? Or if you did not win the bid, does the sunk cost of not winning the opportunity impact your bottom line? You must also consider the impact to your teaming partners and also your client relationships. Next slide, please.
This is the last of the bid, no bid, some of the questions that we're going to talk about. But you want to make sure that you know who the competition is. So for the most part, this slide is divided into a few different things. First is competition. So is there an incumbent? Incumbent meaning, is someone already performing the work? Is there a supplier or a vendor? And do they pose a threat? So if you're looking at an opportunity, simultaneously you need to be trying to figure out who else is going to actually bid, whether it's on SBIR proposal or any other type of proposal. And also, if you're going after competitive business, you need to understand, and again, through a great relationship with that prospect or decision maker, is the competitor favored? So it doesn't do any good if you are going to be pretty much on a short list, if you know that they really favor the incumbent. The other thing is you want to make sure that you have a distinct competitive advantage. So you don't want to be disadvantaged from the beginning. So if you don't have a technology, you don't have the right people. And again, this is outside of just research. In the research world, if you're providing resources, project staffing, you want to make sure that you have a competitive advantage. And does your solution involve, is it new or unproven technologies? We know in the R&D world, research and development, that innovation is, of course, what we're looking for. But if you're going out to a commercial organization and or trying to commercialize, even with the prime contractor, is your technology known enough? Is it going to give them pause for not giving you that opportunity? And also, does the opportunity enhance your reputation and market positioning? So sometimes making a decision to bid, it may not be the wisest decision for you, but if it gives you a lot of notoriety, maybe it does make sense. You have to balance out the cost of going after it versus where does it put you in the market. And that will have a lot more to do in your commercial marketing as you try to commercialize your SBIR, STTR technologies in the commercial market. And does your win, will it open up a new market opportunity for you? So for example, if you were developing in research and development, something that's only going to be used as a proof of concept or prototype, is that going to open up a new market? And I always think about iRobot. That's a great example. Their technology was developed it was like a GPS for data mining, for mines actually, in Warfield. And you all may know about the Roomba and all the other products. So they use that GPS technology to open up a market. So if you go to their site, you'll find many, many different applications that use that GPS technology. And lastly, will the win give you an advantage over your competitors? So you're always thinking about marketing positioning. So regardless of what you're doing, do you have something that's going to get someone at least looking at you? We know how difficult it is to do marketing nowadays, that you can't just walk into an agency. So you always want to think about what's the advantage, how does it improve your market positioning? So now that we know what the key considerations you should have for bid, no bid, we need to talk about where do you put all this information? How do you capture it? So we talked about earlier in the presentation, we were going to give you some marketing tools, techniques. So you have to document this. So we want to make sure that you and all your team members successfully collaborate with the same information. Next slide. So the way you do that is we have something called a capture plan. A capture plan can be a very simple Microsoft Word document, but in a capture plan, and again, we could probably spend days doing capture, talking about the capture plan, but it's a document that shows the historic activities of marketing, conversations, responses to bid, no bid, and capture strategies and activities for this opportunity. So remember the four bubbles that Jason talked about, going from business development to capture to proposal to operations. It's important for your organization to look at everything that you've actually acquired throughout that process and discussions. The capture plan then is a valuable tool. So and you can Google that. There are some standard capture plans that are available. Capture planning, there are large organizations that have been doing this for years with many, many steps, and they're very simplistic ones for small businesses. But it's a valuable tool that documents those discussions. So regardless of the way that you capture that information, it has to be captured. Next slide. In terms of best practices for capture management, you do want to have someone that's in charge of this. So if you don't have a dedicated capture manager, you want to make sure that role is assumed by someone, because the capture manager is accountable. In some organizations where the capture doesn't go so well, that capture manager doesn't remain with that organization. So the roles and responsibilities for the capture manager are to make sure they're accountable and they're working with, and again, think about that four bubble slide, they work with business development, they work with contracting, they work with pricing, they work with your business development team, and they're working with the actual delivery team for project managers. The relationship, of course, we can't say enough about developing relationships, so nurturing them with key stakeholders. And again, we looked at the agency and the prime contractor, all those different liaisons. You want to go what they call up and down in an organization. So from the end users that are using the product to the person, the program manager that has oversight, you want to make sure you nurture those relationships. How do you do that? You have frequent team status meetings. So internally and externally, if you have a large team or working with a prime contractor, you want to make sure that you have usually weekly, if you're maybe 12 months out, and as you get closer to potentially submitting a proposal, sometimes capture teams have daily meetings, they have stand-ups, and they're gathering information. So remember, business development is doing the hunting, they still have the relationships, so you can't necessarily take that business development person out of the equation, but the capture manager is doing the gathering, so you have a strong relationship and are getting that information that the business development person has gathered. You also want to verify and validate input. So it's advisable, if you hear something from one person, you want to validate that with another person. So always validate your information. Although it's potentially true, sometimes people hear things differently. So it's always a good practice to validate through due diligence. So that's multiple people asking the same question of different resources. In capture management, you are always taking an opportunity. We call it running it through multiple bid, no bid gates. So in your organization, you'll need to decide whether or not funding is critical. So if you can't get past the funding or the need for funding, you might decide to abort that opportunity. If you don't have the right resources, if you can't produce a proposal, so proposals due in a 5-day period, do you have the resources to do that? So in any organization, it depends on what's most important to you, but we would suggest that you look primarily at funding, at resources, timeline, and schedule to actually produce, whether it's a proposal or it could be a sole source. So sole source meaning you don't necessarily have to submit against competitors, but you need to make sure that you can deliver it. So it has to go through a certain amount of gates internally. And of course, make sure that you create a schedule of opportunities. So there has to be a closely adhered to schedule based upon milestones, submission, and contract dates. Typically, they slip or they want to slip, but you need to make sure that you adhere to a schedule. So something is due in a year, maybe a few months out, you're actually working on your proposal. Next slide. So now we're going to address, we've got some questions that we received earlier from people that registered for this event. So we want to talk about, answer some of those questions, and we'll do a summary after we spend some time with questions. So we wanted to have at least 15 minutes to talk about some of the questions. So the first thing, what I'd like to do actually is turn this over to Jason, who's going to ask some of a couple of the marketing questions.
Perfect. As a reminder to participants, we will send a transcript of the webinar via email within 30 business days, as well as post this on our SBIR STTR training and advocacy website. I would like to remind everyone that if you have a question, please click on the blue question mark located at the top of the page. And now I'm going to turn this over to Becca. Well, actually, I'm going to work with Becca and ask some questions. All right, and these are going to be specifically to marketing. So my first question, Becca, what role can social media play in marketing products and services? Is it an effective tool for this government space?
So social media is very important these days. As you know, we live in a technology world. You can't really get by without having a technical presence. So when you are running a business, developing technologies, you want to be online. You want to have social media. So you should have a website. It should be good. You should have a good website because every social media platform that you use should point back to your website. So as far as social media platforms, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have Instagram, you have YouTube, and many others. But you want to make sure that you understand which platform is going to work best for your business and your technology and the message you're trying to get out. So social media is used as a complement to your brand, and it's supposed to help build trust. Now, this is more valuable as far as I've seen in the commercial market when it's business to customer, but it doesn't mean that it's not important for the government space. If you want some examples of social media in the government space, I would suggest looking at primes like BAE Systems, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and see how they're using social media and look at the different voices that they may be using on each different platform, because the voices should be different because there are audiences that are different for each platform. And I would say make sure that when you're trying to market and do social media, you get your name out there. You work to get published. So write an article, be on a blog, do a podcast, partner with a research institute. The more your name gets out there, the more people will find you and Google you, which is part of search engine optimization. And search engine optimization is how much you're found on the first pages of the search results. So if someone Googles you, you want to be on the first page, on the second page. So the more you're out there, the more you're sitting on a panel or getting publicity, that will help you with marketing.
Okay, thanks, Becca. So our next question that we're going to answer is, if it's not a case of if you build it, they will come, what are the best ways to market SBIR developed products? And I'm going to turn this over to Philip Reeves.
Sure. So the best way to market SBIR products and services. So I think that one of the best ways is really to kind of do what we've been discussing this whole time. So get in front of customers, engage with them, talk to stakeholders, and that's going to require a lot of, we call it getting out of the building. So go to conferences where you think people will be, have the proper collateral, have the proper quad charts, and you want to engage also with partners. I mean, we talk a lot about working with primes, these large prime contractors. I think another underutilized area for SBIR firms specifically is other small businesses. And so there are a lot of government contractors who are small or they're mid-sized, who they have great customer relationships, but they may not have the technical edge that you guys do. And so I think partnering your technology with their relationships and their know-how, quote unquote, of government contracting is a great marriage that should result in something pretty useful.
All right, thanks for that, Phil. Our next question is, does the DoD publish any data on priorities for required works? Lynn Jenkins, do you mind taking over that question?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So when we talk about the Department of Defense, we break that down into different departments, their agencies. So at the agency level for opportunities, many of those opportunities have industry days. So the government will have resources available during events. Some of them are forecasted on FBO, so the Fed Biz Ops that Phil talked about earlier. So they do talk about their priority days. There are many different industry days that talk about what's important to them. So there's something called the Advanced Planning Briefing to Industry that Army does, where they will tell you what they're looking at. So you can find that at events, and you can also find that in any of the trade magazines. You want to make sure you're doing that, looking at conferences. There are different events, and I think it also answers one of the questions we had about a list of suitable conferences. You can look for things like, they call it AFCEA, AFCEA, or there's Small Business Procurement Event. They have one every year in Washington, D.C. at the Convention Center where all the agencies participate. So you'll find a lot of the agencies talk about what's important, but most importantly, go back to what Phil talked about earlier, look at the agency mission, look at their goals, their mission objectives, they tell you with their own, in their vernacular, what they're looking for. So research, that's why we started in that big bubble chart with all the 9 processes. You need to do your research, and that's what people mean when they say, do your research before you speak with me. Okay.
All right, so our next question is, does DoD provide access to market research reports to improve our commercialization strategies? So Phil, do you mind taking over that one?
Sure, I think this is a great building block off of what Lynn was talking about in the government space. So I think this is more of a commercial question. So to answer the question directly, no, the DoD does not provide market research, but obviously, particularly in SBIR, the DoD is concerned with commercialization reports and commercialization plans that encompass market research. So how do you do that? A couple ways. Number one, obviously, you can just try and Google it. You'll see things out there. You'll see some of those paid reports. I may or may not recommend some of those. Another way you can do it is to look through some of the large investment banks put out research reports about markets or about companies. And so if you Google around, sometimes those research reports will be made available. Now, I think the most targeted way is to find a publicly traded company that operates in a space that you operate in. So say, for instance, you have a technology that works with, robotics. And so you might pick iRobot. If you look at iRobot and go to their website, there will be a section called Investor Relations. And inside Investor Relations, you're looking for a 10-K, the annual report that goes to the SEC. Inside the SEC annual report, there will be a section about market research, and that data is usually very good, very useful. So again, the technique is to find a publicly traded company that is in a market that you're in, or similar to you, or similar to your product or service, and to look in that company's investor relations documents or SEC reports to find market research data.
Okay, so our next question is, what are the best ways to introduce technology to potential customers and partners? And Jenkins?
Yes. So we talked earlier about your different capability statements. So you have to have your materials printed, but the best way to introduce that to potential customers and partners is to make sure that you understand what's being procured. So how do you do that? Every year in the federal government, agencies produce something called a forecast. So they're forecasting what they believe they're looking for, and they're usually published around November. So you should look for that, and they're called acquisition forecasts. So if you go through an acquisition forecast, it'll tell you what they're looking for. And many times, if you look at an opportunity if it's published under FBO, so the Fed Biz Ops, many of the interested vendors will sign their names up, and you'll see it could be large prime contractors. So the best way to introduce that is to, of course, make sure there's a need. Start everything with the opportunity in mind. You don't want to just introduce something. You can submit white papers. That information goes in, but you won't know necessarily if that comes out as a procurement. But the key is you want to make sure that you map the actual technology to that requirement.
So perfect. And then also like to add too, if you're looking to work with mid to large size primes, also look on their websites, on their small business portions or their portals of their websites, because they're usually going to list industry days where you're actually able to go in and show your concept or your technology to people who are actually program managers who are actually looking to buy solutions and technologies. So this is the perfect time for you to have your required chart in place, and also a presentation and a pitch deck, so you really talk about your solution and what you bring to the table.
So, Jason, I'll jump on that as well. So in the commercial space, we obviously spend a lot of time on the government side. In the commercial space, it's more difficult sometimes to find customers, but I think a great place to start is industry associations. And so that way you can learn about a group of businesses at scale and have a way to sort of approach them through a single point of contact. So again, a great way to gather market research, identify points of contact, identify companies that may be customers, and potentially find a way to engage.
Hey, Phil, thank you for that. So our next question is, what is the difference between an RFI and a sources sought? And I think Lynn Jenkins is the expert on that one.
Thank you, Jason. So the difference between an RFI, so that's a request for information, and a sources sought, And I'll start with the sources sought. Typically, small business directors we talked about in agencies, they all have small businesses. They're looking to find out, is there a small type of business that can actually perform the work? So they'll issue something called a sources sought, and it may be a sources sought for a designation. It could be for service disabled veteran-owned small, woman-owned, hub zone company. So they look for sources that can do that business. The key in a sources sought is, I believe that the government is able to use that sources sought, and if there's only one source that can do that work, they've actually issued contracts based on that sources sought. The difference between sources sought and RFI, so what is an RFI? They're asking for information. So they just want to know who can do this work, and typically you'll find that a request for information can be appropriate for both large and small businesses. And sometimes when they're issuing an RFI, what we find is that they're looking for the technical solution. So a request for information, if you submit information, sometimes that information may help the government put together an actual solicitation that they then reissue out to the whole population. So the key is sources sought is more so for small businesses. Our request for information is they want to know who can do this work, and is there just, is it something that's feasible? So many times they test their, what they think they may have technologically available to solve a solution, and they want to see what industry has to offer. Yeah. So I think that we've got about 5 more minutes. What I wanted to mention is that we're going to address a lot of these questions in a written format. So if your question wasn't addressed today, it's just that there's just not enough time. We wish that we did have more time to respond to you. So many of these questions will be addressed. The questions that are not applicable, we probably will not address, but the majority are.
All right. Thank you for that, Lynn. So once again, I want to thank everybody for taking time to participate in today's workshop. As you know, this workshop is part of an ongoing series we are hosting on topics related to DoD SBIR and SBIR Insider program. The following 3 workshops are actually round out our offering for the year. On September 18th, we have a workshop on commercialization assistance program and beyond phase 2 considerations. And basically, we'll have a panel of DoD commercialization readiness program, and transition advocates will provide insight into how to effectively achieve commercialization. On October 9th, we have our test and evaluation workshop. And during this workshop, resources will help companies gain an understanding of the types of tests, cost, and critical timelines that could impact their technical assertion and overall success. And then on October 30th is our phase 3 process, how to identify non-SBIR funding. This is for phase 3 the phase 3 commercialization process will be detailed, highlighting sources and methods of non-SBIR funding. To register for these upcoming workshops, please visit or follow the URL provided at the bottom of the slide. I'd also like to note DARPA's D60 Symposium. Next slide, please. In celebration of its 60th anniversary, DARPA is holding a symposium starting tomorrow, September 5th through the 7th at the National Harbor in Maryland. This event will highlight DARPA's work in breakthrough technologies and is for a wide range of agency stakeholders, including several participants. Highlights include sessions with world-renowned scientists and engineers and a keynote address from Speaker Admiral William McRaven. More information can be found at the link provided. Okay, and if you want more information about D60, please email darpa60@darpa.mil. Once again, that is darpa60@darpa.mil for more information on D60. Next slide, please. All right, so our previous workshops, slides, audio recordings, and transcripts can be found at training.defensebusiness.org/workshops. Once again, that's training.defensebusiness.org/workshops. Also, we would appreciate your feedback by completing a post-workshop survey. A link will be displayed at the end of this session. You may also contact us at sbirtraining@bitecube.com. Once again, that's sbirtraining.com. Thank you again for your attendance, and we encourage you to join us for our final 3 workshops over the next several months. Have a great day, everybody.